for this webinar, which is part of REACH's project on non-communicable diseases. It's an outreach program for journalists, a media fellowship program, and this is part of that. And this webinar is part of a series that we run called the Stitch in Time series, which looks at various non-communicable diseases. And we're looking at mental health in detail this year. And during these very trying times of the COVID-19 crisis, we thought it might be useful for journalists and for all of us to sort of get an idea about how mental health experts are dealing with very, very serious issues such as substance use disorders, anxiety, depression at this time, and how people at home with whom they locked down, people with mental disorders and living with their families in close quarters, how they're able to sort of deal with that and how do they cope as a family. And we're particularly paying attention to the issue of gender-based violence. So I'm just going to ask Dr. Ramya Ananthakrishnan, Director of REACH, to welcome everybody, and then we can go right ahead. Dr. Ramya.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to see many familiar faces. On behalf of REACH, I'd like to welcome our esteemed speakers and all the journalists and the join this webinar series. As Dr. Jaya was mentioning, REACH started working with the media since 2008-9 onwards, and we've been having different kinds of outreach and engagement with journalists in the last 10 to 12 years. So we started in the space of tuberculosis, and currently in the last 3 years we have forayed into diseases also. And we also engage with the journalists in a sustained manner by offering fellowships. We also have these national awards for excellence on reporting on TB. In the last 3 years in particular, from experts, especially during these trying times, relevant information, and also in tune with what the whole country is talking about. And I think no better topics than what has been lined up today. So I'd like to thank our speakers for taking their time and joining us for this session. And I think many of you, as you know, REACH is having this continuous relationship with all the journalists in terms of providing support, and we would be happy to continue this way forward also. So please reach out to us in case of any questions or queries. So with that few words, once again, a very hearty welcome on behalf of REACH, and I hand over to Dr. Jaya to take the webinar series forwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramya. I'd just like to quickly welcome our speakers and to introduce them to everybody. So please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Dr. Senthil Kumar Reddy. He's going to be talking to us about anxiety and depression during the time of COVID-19. He's an additional professor of psychiatry at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, NIMHANS in Bangalore, and has around 20 years of experience in the field of psychiatry. And he was a NIH Fogarty Fellow from the University of Florida in 2016, and formerly a consultant psychiatrist at the La Trobe Regional Hospital, an adjunct lecturer in Monash University, Australia, and a TAG member for the National Policy on Suicide Prevention for the Government of India. So he brings several years worth of experience, and he's been particularly mentioning how at NIMHANS, practically on a daily basis during this very trying time of COVID-19, he's been trying to help patients, people with depression and anxiety disorders, and we look forward to hearing a lot more from him Thank you, Dr. Reddy, for joining us today. We appreciate it. Our next speaker is Dr. Jayant Mahadevan. He's an assistant professor of psychiatry at the Center for Addiction Medicine at NIMHANS, Bangalore again. And his specialization is in addiction psychiatry. And we are very proud to welcome the country's first super specialist in the field of addiction medicine. He has a doctorate, a doctor of medicine and addiction psychiatry. And his areas of interest are vulnerability to addiction, substance use, and co-occurring mental illness. And he also does a lot of training in capacity building. And like Dr. Reddy, he's been dealing with the issue of helping, how to help patients during this time of the pandemic and the lockdown, those who have substance use disorders and who are dependent on alcohol and so forth. So we extend a very warm welcome to you, Dr. Jayant. We're very proud to have you on this panel, and thanks to Dr. Reddy for bringing you on board. Welcome also to Dr. Swarna Rajagopalan, who's a Chennai-based political analyst, and she's been heading the Prajna Trust, which works mainly in the areas of women in history, gender-based violence, as well as women working for peace. It's such a neglected area, poorly explored area, and her trust is coming out with a lot of research documentation, which is putting the role of women in history and the role of women in peace on the map. And in Chennai, Dr. Swarna has been running several campaigns against gender violence for the last several years. And Chennai is very familiar with the work that she and her organization are doing. So we very welcome you, Dr. Swarna. And we also very happy to have with us someone from the White Swan Foundation, the Chief Executive Officer himself, Mr. Manoj Chandran. And if for journalists, I think the White Swan Foundation is a real treasure trove of resources, easily accessible, beautifully organized, in explaining in simple language the fundamentals of a range of mental health disorders, and also giving journalists a taste of what it's like to live with the mental condition. You have the lived experiences of people also documented there. So Mr. Chandran has been, the main focus of the White Swan Foundation is really to improve the knowledge base around mental health for the lay public. So those of you journalists who would like to, access more information, White Swan Foundation's website is a good place to go to, and it works closely with NIMHANS and with several mental health experts around the country. So welcome, Mr. Manoj. We're so grateful to have you here. And I'd just like to sort of dive straight in, because I think with four very eminent speakers with a very, very limited time available, I think let's just dive straight in. I welcome Dr. Reddy to make the, to sort of talk about what it's like to live with anxiety and depression in the time of COVID-19, and how experts like you, Dr. Reddy, how are you handling this on a day-to-day basis? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dr. Jaya. I hope I'm audible to everyone, and I'm visible, hopefully, as well.
You're not visible, audible.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out, because this is...
Just a quick note, we'll be recording this webinar so that we can share it later with the journalists who wish to have access to the webinar who couldn't make it today. I hope everything it's okay with everyone.
Yes, that should be fine by me, at least.
Yes, that's fine.
Fine with me. Yeah, so thank you so much for that, Dr. Jaya and Dr. Ramya. I'm really, it's been a pleasure for me to participate, in the fact that the REACH Foundation reached out in a way. And, I think the series that you're conducting at Stitch in Time is actually a very appropriate name in the context of the scenario that we're all facing, and the, unprecedented times that they have been and would continue to be probably in the near future. From a point of view of anxiety and depression, I think one of the things that is well known to everyone is the fact that the prevalence of the problem in the community, in the country, in the world is very, very high. So it's estimated by the World Health Organization that approximately 1 in every 5 individuals suffers from an anxiety or a depression. And so it's a very common problem. And what we're talking about is not routine, a sense of anxiety or anxiousness or worry that all of us experience as human beings, because that's a natural emotion, but an illness per se, wherein the issue of anxiety can be overwhelming, very disabling, can actually affect a person's ability to function across all domains of their life. And so it comes at a huge cost, and the same holds true for depression. And in what has happened is, in the context of what we have at least seen in the brief period that we've noticed in the last few months, has been that there are 2 types of people who have been seeking help, at least at our institute, and also what we are getting to know from our fellow colleagues, as well as through tele mode as well. A lot of calls have been coming into our hospital seeking support. We've got a helpline, support line regarding specifically COVID and mental health or psychological issues in the context of the same. Is the fact that there are a set of people who already have been suffering from these problems, who, as a result of this particular issue, the pandemic, have had a worsening in their symptoms, and that's partly related to something that's already pre-existing and probably present from a majority of the population, but also the fact that these people are vulnerable because they already have been suffering. So they indeed have warranted extra support, additional support, and inputs. And most of these inputs and supports and interventions have been predominantly from a perspective of non-medication based interventions, and that's been quite adequate. The most important thing for a lot of these individuals who have a priori illnesses like depression and anxiety disorders is the fact that they need to link in very quickly with the mental health professionals and continue to be engaged with them through this period of time, so that their illness doesn't worsen or re-emerge in the context of the pandemic. The other group are people who actually have a vulnerability. So they have not necessarily experienced a depressive illness till date or an anxiety disorder till date. However, because of pre-existing vulnerabilities that they have, and that's due to a variety of different, both internal biological vulnerabilities as well as the environment that they were exposed to through their early childhood development and recent times, has sort of triggered off or brought forth this illness of depression or anxiety. And so this group is an additional set of people who are sort of seeking help at this point in time. One of the most important things is as a lot of people, as most of you from the media, is to be able to understand as to what is normal anxiety, what is health concerns in the context of pandemic versus a disorder or an illness. One of the additional important things that I'll highlight, and because I'm running out of time, is the fact that we all need to remember that both depression and anxiety are not just psychological or in the mind problems, I would say. Stress, associated, and anxiety can actually trigger off various, hormonal systems, within the body. If all of us have experienced anxiety of various sorts. And if you notice, what happens is when we are anxious, our mouth tends, we start to sweat. We can start our heart beating, more pronounced. We can feel the chest, thumping. We can feel, a tummy upset. We can start to feel dizzy, overwhelmed, and we lose our clarity and focus and ability to think clearly at that point in time. So this is something. Imagine experiencing this continuously throughout the day, or repeatedly multiple times a day. That can be almost paralyzing. And that's what happens in anxiety disorders. And whilst I'm not going to get too much into OCD, the only thing that I would mention briefly is that although people, at least in our experience, who have OCD, have gotten unwell, not directly as a result of the requirement of cleaning and infection and contamination, but because of all the other worries and problems that all of us are encountering with their life, with their jobs, with their children, with their families, with the general health and well-being of everyone, that has led to their illness worsening. So we've not per se seen a direct increase or a correlation of people who have a fear of contamination, which is a diagnosable obsessive compulsive disorder, coming and seeking help in the brief period of time. But I guess I'm not someone who can predict the future, so I can't comment on that. From here, I would just probably request my colleague Dr. Jayant to probably discuss, because the issues are intertwined with substance use, and probably discuss from his perspective what he would like to share with all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Senthil. Can I request to share my screen? I have a few slides which I'd like to present.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Just give me a second. Okay. Very good afternoon to everyone, and I'd like to just thank all the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk to all of you journalists a little bit about substance-related issues in the time of COVID-19. I think, as Dr. Senthil had pointed out already, anxiety, depression, stress, and substance use are quite intertwined. And it is well established that disaster scenarios or pandemics actually lend themselves to higher levels of all of these issues. And so it becomes important to talk about them. So I'm assistant professor of psychiatry, I think, as has already been mentioned. To give you a bit of a background, as I'd mentioned, there's already data which is actually piling up saying that the COVID-19 pandemic seems to be associated with significant mental health consequences. And as has already been pointed out by Dr. Reddy, people with pre-existing mental health conditions and substance use disorders appear to be at an increased risk for some of these adverse consequences. Now, as we all know, the global response to the pandemic has primarily been measures such as lockdowns to varying extents, as well as social distancing measures. Interestingly, actually, there have been very different policies around the world with respect to alcohol and tobacco sales, varying from complete bans on alcohol and tobacco sales in countries like India, Thailand, as well as South Africa, to a fairly liberal sales of alcohol and tobacco in many countries where they have been deemed to be essential commodities as well. So there's a whole spectrum of policies which have been used with regards to that. Now, it's important to understand that what kind of impact does use of substance has on the illness COVID-19 itself. And it has actually been found that consuming alcohol may actually increase the risk of contracting a number of bacterial and viral infections, including COVID-19. So we do know that alcohol consumption tends to decrease immunity. There have also been studies which have pointed that tobacco smoking might actually be a risk factor for development of severe COVID-19 disease. So this has actually led to the WHO recommending that as far as possible, individuals should attempt to abstain or refrain as far as possible from alcohol and tobacco use during the pandemic. Now, with the background of this, whenever one is trying to understand problems related to substance use, one needs to understand that these problems exist on a spectrum. At the base of the pyramid, you have individuals who use the substances, and this is a classification which is given by the WHO. You have people, a large number of people who actually use substances recreationally and do not actually develop any problems with substance use. At the next level of the pyramid, you have individuals who have hazardous use, and hazardous use is defined as a pattern of use wherein a person is using substances and has a potential for developing harm or has a potential hazard linked to his use of substances. So for example, a person who drinks and drives is somebody who has hazardous use of substances. He may not actually end up having an accident, but he's putting himself in a position to actually develop problems related to the substance use. Then you have something called harmful use. Harmful use is where the individual has actually started developing problems, either physical or psychological, related to the use of substances. And at the very tip of the pyramid is something that is called dependent use, which is ultimately kind of a syndrome of use of substances, where the person continues to use substances despite accruing harm from the use of substances. The person uses the substances at the neglect of alternative pleasures, is not able to control his use of substances, craves for substances or has an irresistible urge to use substances, and requires greater amounts of substances to get a high, and even develops withdrawal symptoms when the substance is not used. Now, the reason why I'm talking about the spectrum of substance use related problems, even in this context, and I think it's important for journalists to understand this, is that while dependent use is what usually comes to medical practitioners in terms of when we see patients in the clinic, we usually see people who are dependent on substances. But there are a number of other patterns of substance use, such as harmful use and hazardous use, which are very common in the community and actually associated with a number of adverse health as well as social outcomes. The other point that one needs to understand is not all use is problematic use, as the bottom part of the pyramid actually illustrates. So there are a number of people who use substances without any adverse consequences as well. Key question is alcohol and tobacco use during this current pandemic. And the second key question, which I think is very important, which one needs to understand, is also what has happened to treatment services for individuals with alcohol and tobacco dependence. Now, if one reviews, so I did a brief review of the literature that is available, both the popular as well as scientific literature. And if you look at early reports, which came in February and March, what most people have said is that, especially in Western countries, there seemed to have been an increase in alcohol sales, both online as well as in stores, because many countries in the West were continuing to sell alcohol in stores and departmental stores and so on. In addition to this, there were also a number of myths that were actually being promulgated with regards to the protective influence of alcohol and smoking, as well in many countries in Europe as well as Asia. And this may have actually contributed to an increased consumption in the early part of the pandemic. There were also a number of countries where there were restrictions on movement and restrictions on sales of alcohol. And there have been reports of a number of deaths related to consumption of spurious liquor. This particular report talks about a number of deaths of this sort in Iran. So the reason why I'm mentioning all of this are, these are actually typical responses with regards to the public or the population in response to the occurrence of a pandemic. Now, as the pandemic has progressed, there have actually been some studies which have been done in various countries across the world, which have actually shown that, so there are some studies which have been done in France and China, which have shown that there have been increased uses of alcohol, an increased relapse to alcohol and tobacco use, as well as an increase in the use of screens. So a number of people have been using more screen time, as well as spending more times on social media apps and so on, as well as changes as far as diet and unhealthy dietary habits. Some of the other studies which have been conducted in Italy and Australia have actually shown that this trend may not be universal. It's not that everyone increases their use of alcohol and tobacco, but that there are certain individuals who actually increase the use of alcohol or tobacco, and there may be other individuals who may actually use this opportunity to increase pro-health behaviors and actually cut down on alcohol and tobacco use. So basically, what we've been able to understand is that the COVID-19 pandemic is it's fairly complex in the way that it affects the use of substances in populations. But what we do understand is that there are certain factors which actually lead to an increase in substance use during these times. And the occurrence of depression, anxiety, and stress-related symptoms certainly does seem to increase the likelihood of alcohol and smoking intake. Other factors such as heavy use before the pandemic, middle age or average or higher income, as well as proximal factors such as losing one's job, as well as occurrence of stress and depression, seems to increase the likelihood of using alcohol and smoking during the pandemic. There is a little bit of data which has emerged from India as well, including some data which we had collected at our center. We had conducted an analysis of presentations to our emergency in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we actually observed that there were an increased number of serious presentations of alcohol withdrawal syndrome, which occurred after the announcement of the lockdown. This is something which is seen to be expected in situations where there is a sudden reduction in the availability of alcohol, particularly for alcohol-dependent subjects. Similar anecdotal reports were also present from Kerala. And it's interesting to note that as the pandemic has progressed, a study which was conducted at the All India Institute actually found that in India there were reductions in use of alcohol and tobacco. But there was also a rampant black market which was continuing to be operational, and a number of individuals were still continuing to use alcohol and tobacco even during the lockdown. So there are more studies which are being done, including studies at our center, where we are going to try to look at what exactly has happened to substance use during the pandemic. And hopefully we will be sharing some of those results with you in the days to come. Now, when we're talking about the impact on treatment services, there are which one needs to keep in mind. The first consideration is that in general, during a pandemic, there is increased healthcare resources which are used for managing the pandemic. And so therein there are reduced resources for other conditions, including mental health conditions. This is a pattern that has actually been seen across the world. In addition to that, there is also an increased burden of mental health and substance use related presentations, which tend to burden an already strained system. So this is actually something which we have seen in India as well, that for a number of patients, it's actually been quite difficult to access services. This is something which has been published in the same report from the All India Institute, where people have actually found it difficult to purchase medicines and come for follow-up to the hospital. And we would be also systematically evaluating some of these factors in the days to come. But the interesting thing is that it's not all negative. I mean, actually, the COVID-19 pandemic has also led to a lot of very interesting responses from treatment services to be able to adapt to this current situation. A lot of them have been technology-based solutions. I think it was very timely of the government to actually release telemedicine and telepsychiatry guidelines, which actually encourage the use of telemedicine services to be able to bridge treatment service gaps. And I think NIMHANS has taken a leading role in being able to actually deliver some of these services. As Dr. Senthil had already referred, there is a mental health helpline which deals with a whole host of mental health issues, which has been conducted by NIMHANS. At our center, we have actually set up and instituted proactive telephonic follow-up. My colleague who works with me, Dr. Lekhansh, has been instrumental in setting that up. And we've actually been able to reach out to all the patients who have actually consulted us in the last 1 year. And we have used telemedicine to actually give them prescriptions wherever required, refer them to treatment services when needed. And again, we'll be writing up a little bit about this as well. In addition to that, we've also set up e-consultations where doctors can actually contact specialist mental health care providers and help them to treat individuals with substance use disorders. And we've had almost more than 200 e-consultations which we have done at the Center for Addiction Medicine as well. So in summary, the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly led to increases in alcohol and tobacco use globally. This may be mediated in part by associated mental health issues, which may be either pre-existent or a new onset. Treatment services for substance use disorders certainly require to be cognizant of this landscape and need to adapt services for the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahadevan and Dr. Reddy, for those wonderful, discussions. I'd just like to ask Dr. Swarna Rajagopal to sort of share her thoughts based on these two presentations. Go on, Swarna, the floor is all yours.
Based on these two presentations, Dr. Jaya, you keep making this task more and more difficult. तो पहली बात ये है कि I have 10 minutes और 10 मिनट में मैं उस विषय पे बात करूंगी जिसपे मैं पूरा साल काम करती हूँ। दूसरी बात ये है कि मुझे बताया गया कि मैं ज्यादातर हिंदी में बोलूँ। मैं हिंदी में बोल सकती हूँ, पर अगर आप मुझे स्टेज पे बैठा के हिंदी में बोलना बताओगे, so I am going to make a lot of mistakes. So पहले से ही मैं सॉरी कह देती हूँ और बाद में आप मुझे करेक्शंस और टिप्पणियां भेज दीजिए। So I want to talk to you about gender-based violence, sexual and gender-based violence, yawning or लैंगिक हिंसा in the context of today's conversation. So मैंने कोई presentation वगैरह नहीं बनाई. I'm sending you a PDF जो आप देख सकते हो, जिसमें ठीक-ठाक अंग्रेजी और शायद काफी गलत हिंदी भी है. But I want to start off by clarifying that, what gender-based violence is. जब हम gender violence के बारे में बात करते हैं तो इसमें दो चीजें हैं. One is that it is about anything that somebody does to you against your will. So consent is a very important part of the definition of gender violence. और दूसरी बात ये है कि ये gender पे होती है. So certain things जो अगर आप मर्द होते तो ये आपके साथ नहीं होता. Yeah, this is happening to you because you're a young girl. These things are what we call gender violence by and large. I'm being very quick again, thinking about the 10 minutes. So, इसमें हिंसा भी है और जबरदस्ती भी है. ये physical हो सकती है, शारीरिक, भावनात्मक, psychological, sexual, and it can also take the form, and domestic violence law in India recognizes it can also be economic. So, for example, शादी से पहले हम agreement करते हैं कि मेरी salary जाएगी अपने मायके, and शादी के बाद इसे नहीं, this can only come into your in-laws house. This has to be spent on our household. ये भी एक तरह की violence होती है. Gender violence affects everybody. Women, girls, men, boys, other gender identity groups, but ज्यादातर ये औरतों और लड़कियों को भी हार्म करती है. So Dr. Jaya ने कहा था कि आप डेटा दे दो ना. I'm just going to tell you one thing. आप किसी भी औरत से पूछो कि सुबह से शाम तक वो कितना सोचती है हिंसा के बारे में कि अगर मैं यहाँ जाऊँ तो ये होगा, ये पहनूंगी तो वो होगा, अगर मैं ये कहूँगी तो ऐसा शायद रिएक्शन हो सकता है, अगर मैं इसे मना कर दूं तो क्या ये मुझ पे एसिड लगाएगा. What is going to happen to me? The whole day, the whole life, girls and women are planning around the possibility of violence. So if I tell you this, you don't really need numbers like 1 in 3 women experience violence in their lifetime. जाहिर है कि ऐसा ही होता है. This is the most unavoidable reality of our lives as women, as girls. और ये बहुत छोटी सी उम्र से हमें पता चला जाता है. constantly planning, ये करेंगे, वो नहीं करेंगे, इस टाइम पे जाएंगे, इस टाइम तक आ जाएंगे, वहां जाएंगे तो फोन करेंगे. So this actually makes I'm going to try and focus mostly on the connection between mental health and gender violence, but just think about this one thing. अगर इसी चीज के बारे में जब हम चाहे किताब पढ़ सकते हैं या खाब देख सकते हैं या कोई पेंटिंग बना सकते हैं, अच्छी सी पकवान बना सकते हैं, इस पूरा टाइम हम वायलेंस को अवॉइड करने में लगाएंगे तो हमारा क्या होगा. So मैं इसमें ध्यान नहीं दूंगी कि जेंडर वायलेंस और हेल्थ का क्या कनेक्शन होता है ही. but I have a the PDF I'm sending you has some information on that. I really do want to go straight to the point of mental health, because I think it's important to note कि जब बड़े हादसे होते हैं और उनके बारे में हम न्यूज़ में लिखते हैं, तो then we tend to be very politically correct कि सारे causes देखते हैं, ये हुआ, कोई editorial लिख देता है, don't use this word, ऐसा मत सोचो. बट जब छोटे हादसे होते हैं, छोटे इंसिडेंट्स होते हैं हमारे घर में या हमारे ऑफिस में, तो हम उन्हें ज्यादातर नजरअंदाज करते हैं. एक बात इसे you're taking it too seriously, you are overreacting. और दूसरी तरफ बेचारा उसको देखो, वो कितने टेंशन में है, कितना तनाव है, कितना स्ट्रेस है. जब उसका, in fact recently we did some research. A couple of women said to us, my husband was fine till he had business losses. Uske baad he began beating me because, he has to take out that tension, that psychological stress somewhere. ये जो हम causal link बना देते हैं कि violence होता है तो इस कारण कि किसी को कोई psychological problem है या mental health problem है, ये हमें अपने ज़हन से निकाल देना चाहिए. क्योंकि लैंगिक यौनिक हिंसा इस कारण नहीं होती है कि किसी का मेंटल हेल्थ ठीक नहीं है. Mental health is not a cause. Poor mental health is not a cause for gender violence. Please let me underscore that. Why does gender violence happen? लैंगिक यौनिक हिंसा क्यों होते हैं? पहली बात ये है कि कोई भी वायलेंस हो, और खासतौर पे लैंगिक हिंसा, इट इज अ पावर प्ले. शक्ति का प्रदर्शन होता है कि देखो मैं कर सकता हूँ, तुम क्या करोगे, व्हाट विल यू डू. दूसरी बात, और इसी में एक पक्ष है हकदारी, एंटाइटलमेंट. मैं ये हूँ, मैं वो हूँ, मैं आपका बॉस हूँ, या मैं आपको सैलरी देता हूँ, या पति हूँ, इसलिए मेरा हक बनता है कि मैं अपनी मर्जी आप पे थोपूं. This is the second part of it. The third part of it, bottom line, is patriarchal violence, पितृसत्तात्मक हिंसा. So, आप अगर मानसिक स्वास्थ्य और लैंगिक हिंसा को जोड़ोगे, तो ये जोड़ नहीं बनता कि मानसिक स्वास्थ्य की वजह से होती है हिंसा. There is no justification. अगर आप ऐसा बनाओगे, so you're saying it is okay. अच्छा, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling depressed, तो मैं किसी को भी कुछ भी करूँ, ऐसा नहीं चलता, no? So there is no justification for sexual and gender-based violence at all. बल्कि I want to point to you the other direction that it works in. अगर आप हमेशा सोचोगे that you may be subject to violence, that something may happen to you, you are not safe at home, तो उस दबाव, उस तनाव का क्या असर होगा? Then you are vulnerable to the kinds of concerns and problems that Dr. Reddy and Dr. Mahadevan have talked about. हर बार 24 घंटे अगर आप इसके बारे में सोचोगे, तो जरूर आपके मानसिक स्वास्थ्य पे प्रभाव होगा. दूसरी बात, अगर आपने शारीरिक हिंसा या यौनिक हिंसा का अनुभव किया है, तो उसका भी मानसिक असर हो सकता है ना. और ये भी बात एक है कि अगर किसी को जैसे मानसिक विकार या मानसिक स्वास्थ्य के कोई भी प्रॉब्लम्स हो, then just like other people with disabilities, they are more vulnerable to violence because people do what they like, say what they like, and think, who is going to believe her? ये तो ऐसी है, ये तो वैसी है, ये कहेगी तो कहेगी कि ये बस कहानियां बना रही है. So you have less credibility, less power in society, and therefore more vulnerability. भेद्यता ज्यादा हो जाती है. So while a small number of people who perpetrate violence may have mental health problems, I just want you to break that connection decisively. Okay. The other part I want to focus on is emotional abuse. हम हिंसा के बारे में सोचते हैं तो हम ज्यादातर यौनिक या शारीरिक हिंसा के बारे में सोचते हैं. घरेलू हिंसा पर्टिकुलरली, पर आप सोचो कि एक दिन में, एक जिंदगी में, ये छोटी छोटी चोटें जो हम खाते हैं, आप कुछ करते हो और not bad, you know, doing it, and then someone comes home and you've made something, you've taken the trouble to make 3 dishes, and somebody in your house says, "Arey, she can't cook anything, no?" Or ladies can't drive. These sound like small things, but over a period of time, you think, okay, शायद मैं कुछ कर ही नहीं पाऊंगा, शायद ठीक है आज मैं ये ब्रांच मैनेजर बन गई हूँ, पर पता नहीं, maybe it was reservation, maybe it was this, maybe it was that, कोई और नहीं मिला होगा। तो ये जो हमारी कॉन्फिडेंस होती है, सेल्फ एस्टीम होती है, उन सब पे प्रभाव होता है from different kinds of emotional abuse. If you don't do this for me, I will take away the children. Don't talk to your relatives. क्या उसके साथ क्या बात कर रही थी? You went to buy dal. इतना टाइम लगता है क्या? It doesn't take so long to buy dal. Who are you? These things over a period of time have an impact on emotional and mental well-being. And I think अगर आप जबरदस्ती ये रिश्ता जोड़ना चाहोगे मानसिक स्वास्थ्य और लैंगिक हिंसा के बीच, I think this is a place for you to look. क्योंकि जो हमें दिखाई नहीं देता, तो जो सुनाई नहीं देता, उसे हम नजरअंदाज करते हैं और उसके बारे में हम सोच ही नहीं सकते। तो with this I would go on to this question that Dr. Jaya had said, think about things that people can write about. तो कहाँ है ये न्यूज़ एंड फीचर स्टोरीज? एक बात है कि हम actually I want to talk about COVID-19, but since the others have talked so well about it, I'll pass. But I will point to one thing. जब कभी आपातकालीन स्थिति हो, किसी भी तरह की, whether it is a disaster, युद्ध हो, भूकंप हो, बाढ़ हो, COVID-19 हो, जब कभी इमरजेंसी आपातकालीन स्थिति क्राइसिस हो, तब जरूर लैंगिक यौनिक हिंसा ज्यादा हो जाते हैं। The incidence of gender-based violence increases at all kinds. हम सिर्फ, हमारी क्या आदत है, एक चीज पे हम ध्यान देते हैं तो उससे वहां हमारा ध्यान हटता ही नहीं। तो it's not just घरेलू हिंसा, not just domestic violence, trafficking, rape, incest rape, child sexual abuse. आप सोचिए उन बच्चों के बारे में जिनके माँ बाप कोविड में गुजर गए। I will wrap up now, if that's a reminder that time is passing. उनके बारे में सोचिए जो अनाथ बन गए हैं, who are also who lost parents at the walk home by the migrants. उनका क्या होगा? They are vulnerable to trafficking, they are vulnerable to rape. So, ये कहानियां हैं बताने के लिए, and the violence experienced by men, trans and other violent, non-binary people. Where are the support services? देखिए, and I will stop with this actually abruptly. There are 3 parts. अगर आप हिंसा के बारे में लिख रहे हो, ये सोचो, निवारण, prevention, there is protection, और मीडिया, सरकार दोनों इसी पे बैठ जाते हैं। प्रोटेक्शन और ये भी काम ठीक से नहीं होता। तीसरा जो है ये है एक्सेस टू जस्टिस एंड सर्विसेज, न्याय और देखभाल। सो these are places that you need to ask, ये हो रहा है कि नहीं? निर्भया फंड है, क्या हो रहा है? वन स्टॉप सेंटर्स हैं, कितने हैं? प्रोटेक्शन ऑफिसर का प्रोविजन, these are the stories that are waiting to be written. And with that I will stop and let the program proceed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajagopalan. That was a absolutely passionate and wonderful and well-informed discussion as usual. Wouldn't expect anything less from you. And let's go on to hear from Mr. Manoj Chandran of the White Swan Foundation before we, open the floor for questions. Thanks again, Swarna.
Thank you, Dr. Jaya, and thank you for my fellow speakers. And I know that we are running out of time, and I'll try and keep it short. But and the topic that I'm covering is reporting on mental health in general, and particularly in the times of COVID. To begin with, I would want to point out to the participants that there is a short article that I've shared, which I'm sure it will reach you, about the broader aspect that we must keep in mind when it comes to reporting on mental health. Mental health is a very complex subject, like our learned psychiatrists have spoken about, Dr. Reddy and Dr. Mahadevan has spoken about. And it is, so the moment we try and cover an area like a complex area like mental health, one of the things we have to keep in mind is that are we covering all the angles? Because sometimes if we are going to only touch upon one, we will probably end up being a little biased. So it's very important that we make sure that there are a lot of aspects that we have covered from a grammar perspective and other areas, because it has social implications also. So I'm not getting into a lot of things, a lot of those areas that you must keep in mind as a journalist when you're covering on mental health. But if you look at from a COVID perspective, now the good thing that has happened is that a lot of stories are coming out. I mean, a lot of media reports are coming out for the first time on mental health care. So this problem that we are currently dealing with has really given opportunity for mental health to become mainstay, take center stage, and be it the emotional issues that people in the families are facing, or the lockdown has pushed us to, or the migration related problems and mental health thereon. And then, of course, reporting on suicide across the country as a result of lockdown, many other areas. So a lot of reporting has happened. But there are two broad areas that I would want to touch upon. One is, of course, the language. As journalists, I think, and one of the things we have learned, White Swan Foundation has learned when we began reporting about, writing about, and creating knowledge on mental health, that language matters foremost when we are writing and disseminating knowledge on mental health. And language has to be, it's a complex area. Unless we really understand the nuances and the communication, a certain usage of words are making across to our readers and viewers, we should be very careful about it. Just to pick up something, some very broad, quick areas. Is my language stereotyping? To give an example, this is not an example that I picked up from any media, just picking up, but I'm sure you will understand. These are the kind of headings that we get, headlines that we get to read sometimes. Mentally ill beggar runs amok in the bazaar. Mentally ill, and so are we stereotyping? Are we creating unnecessary adjectives using mental illnesses of somebody? Is my language triggering fear? Is my language factually correct or not? It's very important that we always make sure that our facts are right. We do that all the time in journalism. But when it comes to mental health, it's a very difficult space to be. So just to give an example, depressed due to job loss, man commits suicide. Now these, and we need to understand what is the impact of such headings or such content on the readers. And a lot of the grammar that we as society, we as common man pick up is based on the language we all have been given on mental health care. So it's very important that we understand and emphasize on the usage of right language when we're reporting on mental health. The second point I want to make is about the newsworthiness of an incident. It's, I mean, I've encountered a lot of content on mental health in general, and of course also around COVID, when I began to ask, should that news have been published at all? One of the areas where I've commonly seen this problem is when suicide reporting happens a lot. Of course, a lot of our suicide news comes from the crime desk, and crime desk in turn, of course, relies on the police control room's report on for that day. But to be able to pause and ask the question that is that suicide or incidents of suicide or death due to suicide is important to be told to the reporter, to the readers and viewers, and what is the value that we are going to give to the readers. So very carefully making sure that we have really passed the test of newsworthiness of a story around mental health is very key here, I would say. If that passes the test, then we have to really understand how are we going to communicate by making sure that the right grammar is used. Again, now focusing on COVID-19 or pandemic and mental health care, what I've seen missing here is that we are not focusing on, largely, we're not focusing on the solutions part of journalism. Of course, it is important that we constantly report on the facts and what is happening on the ground. But I think as journalists, and particularly health journalists, it really gives us a great opportunity to repeatedly point out solutions and provide people with solution journalism, as the term that has become really popular over the last few years. So news reports we see do not necessarily help the emotionally stressful situations people are already coping with. And I also would argue that we must serve this purpose to really help them, sail through the tough situations that we are all in today. People desperately need help to cope with their problems, many of which are emotional in nature, of course. And if you're able to provide them a solution, it really helps. They will love us for that. And we have seen that whenever we have written articles of certain nature, which has really directly helped them, people write back to us or call us up saying that it really helped us. I'm going to point out a few points here on what are the broad kind of challenges people are facing around emotional issues people are facing around the pandemic. And a lot of those have been already pointed out by the learned co-speakers earlier. So to begin with, they have been staying with so family. I mean, this is constantly coming up when we speak to psychiatrists and mental health professionals, that one of the biggest challenge we are all facing today is that we are all huddled as family for a much longer period of time. Earlier, before the pandemic, we would go to office, children would go to the school, and we all come back in the evening. There is a me time, there is some breathing space. And we also always loved the fact that we would come back in the evening and spend that time together. But today, large part of our time is spent together, and that me time is not available. And as human beings, we require that, because of which, as Dr. Soumya is pointing out, we are seeing a lot of issues, and issues which are of relationship in nature. And like any adverse situation which we have always seen ourselves grappling with, one of the biggest popular profile of people who really become the victim are the most vulnerable of sort. So who are the weak people, who are the most vulnerable modules of the family to begin with, or in the society in general? We must identify them and understand what kind of issues they are going through. Dr. Soumya has very clearly articulated about the domestic violence and and the various ways people are, not just ladies but others also, going through this. Look at children. Children are in fact the most silent victims, I would say. We have been really seeing a lot of stories about it, and when we speak to mental health professionals, we hear about how children are the silent victims. They don't even know how to speak about their problems, and they today are really seeing this whole tension, the whole issues, anxiety and all among various family members coming out, and they are the mute spectators there. So we really have to understand, maybe they are the people who we have to write a lot about, speak and give a voice to, I would say. We are also seeing the entire student population across the country today suffering. A lot of news are coming out every other day, which sometimes confuses people. And I have seen, we've done a lot of webinars for students and such people across various streams. They have been opening up and speaking about the fact that they're completely confused. They don't know. Sometimes they're told that go to online classes. Sometimes the online classes are banned. Sometimes they're told that they have to study the whole syllabus. Sometimes they're told that the syllabus has been cut short. Teachers are not trained on the online platform. So we don't know effectiveness of the whole platform called online. And then parents have to participate in this whole learning process of the children, which they may probably not have otherwise been doing until now. And then, of course, this whole aspect of we have not at all understood the mental health repercussion of long time that we would spend in terms of in front of laptop. In fact, most often in front of a small 4.7-inch screen of a cell phone, I would say. Imagine a 13-year-old child spending all their time, large part of their time, daytime, in front of a cell phone, listening to their teachers and trying to understand the lessons and all. Lot of content, lot of knowledge needs to be created, lot of hand-holding, lot of help that we must be able to provide to the student population also. There are several emotionally charged attitudes that we carry about the spread of virus. I think for journalists like us, there is a lot of opportunity to pick up every single emotions that we go through, and the kind of intensity, higher intensity, each of those emotions are today getting displayed because of the current problem. Fear, anxiety, hopelessness, resignation, somatic issues, and there are many such things. And so it is very important that we really understand the challenges. If I can take 2 minutes more to pick up a few opportunities which I think journalists must, health journalists particularly, health correspondents, must try and cover for the readers, for their readers and viewers, particularly in the current pandemic time. To begin with, I would say data is something which I've really been happy about, because every day when I open the newspaper, I see that a lot of data being spoken about, a lot of charts are being put in front of the readers about the increase in numbers, number of people who have, who have reported positives, and onwards to many other data. When I speak about those data to people, I'm not very sure if the common man really understands the data. So I have not really seen a lot of, I have not seen media really helping, hand-holding our readers and viewers through the data as to what the data means. By giving the data, what we are usually doing is to let the reader decide as to what does that data mean and what should they do about the data. So it really will help if we are going to address the various emotions that these data really take out, and then tell them, no, this data means this is what we need to do. So that is something, if we can really do, that will help. And then to talk about emotional resilience. So all of us today are really grappling with and our emotional resilience is being tested a lot. And I think it will be really nice if we come out with content and feature articles and stories, talking to a lot of people to tell them as to how do you really build emotional resilience, how do you jump out of the current problem and manage to cope with the problems. Problems like isolation, how do I deal with quarantine, and many things. Every single situation that we're dealing with requires us to build emotional resilience. Relationship, like Dr. Soumya pointed out again, is an extremely important one, I think. And what we are hearing constantly from mental health experts is that we may solve the problem of COVID-19 in the next 1.5 years or so. But mental health problem that the situation is creating, we may not be able to solve for a much longer time. So it is extremely important that journalists across the country begin to start focusing on mental health care and begin to focus on very simple areas like relationships, simple areas like me as an individual as to how do I stay mentally healthy, and help them through what could be the right kind of actions for this. A few such story ideas would be about recovery from a mental health issue. All of us are going through this, and building hope, creating positive signals of the future, talking a lot about good stories of people who have jumped out of COVID-19 problems and also handled it very well emotionally. So if we can really give, and we have seen that at White Swan Foundation, every time we publish a real story of mental health being handled, people have loved it. People relate to the story and they say that I connect with it and I'm now encouraged to take right decisions. Now that's what our objective in writing about mental health care would be. Help people make right decisions on mental health. Today, people are struggling to make right decisions. Can we help them as journalists to do that? So, and as Dr. Jaya pointed out, if you go to White Swan Foundation, there's a huge amount of knowledge in 6 languages. Particularly over the last 4 months, we have been covering mental health and COVID-19 in a huge manner. Please refer to that. Please pick up any content or any angle perspective that you would want to. Call us up, reach out to us. We would love to collaborate with you and help you understand better those topics and help you write on those. So with that, I will stop, and thank you so much for the opportunity to interact with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Manoj, for again such a helpful presentation, and it's given us lots of ideas about what kinds of stories one could do. And we're also very grateful to have our expert speakers, Dr. Swarna, Dr. Jayant, Dr. Reddy, and Mr. Manoj still with us, we hope that we know we've overshot the time, but we we have questions. So I'm just going to quickly check, take a show of hands from our speakers as to, is it possible for us to extend by about a half hour? Would that be possible?
I'm fine.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll try to make this as fast as possible. So I'm going to give it to Rashmika now. Rashmika, the floor is all yours. So, please go ahead with the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jay, and thank you so much to all our panelists for sharing the experiences and insights that have given us a greater understanding of key mental health issues in the COVID-19 context, their impact on women, and also how we as journalists can improve.
Can someone mute their? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Am I audible? Okay, I'll go on.
Yes.
Yeah, and also how their impact on women, and also how we as journalists can improve the way we can think about and report on mental health in these trying times. We have a number of questions from our participants. We'll try to answer the ones that have come in our during the webinar in the chat box first. Ms. Uma Ramanathan asks, is this situation of anxiety or violence being fed by inability to empathize or care and be considerate? Can I request Dr. Swarna to take this question?
Sure, although I think maybe the others are better qualified. That never stops a person from trying, right? I think so, but where does care and empathy come from? And how do you learn to be empathetic? How do you learn how do you learn kindness? I think that's a completely different realm of conversation. And you learn it in part by modeling it, and if we are kind, people who see us will be kind. अगर हम करुणा दिखाएंगे तो we will get it back, but that's a completely different conversation. I don't think, I really think I should probably sensibly toss this to Dr. Reddy, Dr. Mahadev, and Mr. Chandan. The question was, is anxiety created by lack of compassion? Very briefly.
Yeah. So, in terms of anxiety, I would probably feel that I would in a way to some extent agree with Dr. Swarna. And the issue is that the anxiety can often actually translate to violence. तो क्या हो सकता है अगर आप बेचैन हो, आपको परेशानी हो, आपको फिक्र हो, और अगर उस हालात में और या तो उस घर में या तो उस वातावरण में ये सारी चीजें मतलब नॉर्मल एक्सेप्टेबल हैं कि अगर गुस्सा करना, तोड़फोड़ करना, मारपीट करना, चिल्लाना, गाली देना, अगर ये सारी चीजें वहां पे उस घर में या उस वातावरण में वो सारी चीजें हो रही हैं या पहले भी होती थी, अब इस कोविड के स्थिति में तो और बढ़ेंगी। अब लोगों के, जैसे डॉक्टर स्वर्ण ने कहा था कि लोगों के जॉब्स चले गए हैं, पैसा कब आएगा, कहाँ से आएगा, पढ़ाई होगी तो कैसी होगी, कैसी करनी पड़ेगी, बच्चों के लिए जो जरूरतें हैं, घर की जरूरतें हैं, वो कैसे हम उनको मतलब संभाल पाएंगे, या उन चीजों के लिए हम अपने तौर से हम कुछ कर सकते हैं कि नहीं। और सबसे जरूरी ये बात है कि जब इन सारी चीजों से, इन सारी विचारों से क्या होता है, फिक्र बढ़ जाती है, स्ट्रेस, परेशानी और बेचैनी होने लग जाती है, और फिर वो बेचैनी को किसी तरह से कम करना पड़ता है। और कई लोग क्या करते हैं, 2-3 तरीके हैं, या तो एक सही तरीके हैं कई मतलब, और कोई उतने शायद सही ना कहे। तो जैसे कि डॉक्टर जयंत ने बताया था, लोग इस स्थिति में शायद पीना ज्यादा लग जाए, दूसरी चीजों इस यूजिंग अदर सब्सटेंसेस शायद बढ़ जाए, और उससे क्या होता है कि जो लेवल ऑफ कंट्रोल होता है एक व्यक्ति में अपने परेशानियों को संभालने में, अपने इमोशंस को संभालने में, वो कंट्रोल कम हो जाता है और ये वायलेंस बढ़ता है. So there is an interlink. There's definitely an interlink, and I would think that interlink is both ways. It is not just one way, but both ways, in the sense that because you're in an environment and in a situation that has accepted partner violence, and we call it gender-based violence or intimate partner violence. You can call it there are different levels of terms to it. But once it is acceptable, then that is something that gets propagated and it is witnessed by the next generation, then it's acceptable to the next generation, and that's how it moves forward. So there is a very dynamic relationship to it. And so if you are exposed to that,
I just like, can I add something to that? I can't tell if I'm interrupting because it's coming up here or anything.
Dr. Swarna,
Please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that particularly to journalists, we often get phone calls and people will ask, what is the cause of violence? Is it this? Is it this? And there's a line by a French writer that I always think of: to understand is to justify. अगर आप किसी चीज का कारण दोगे, तो you are also saying कि हाँ इस कारण हुआ तो ठीक है, ऐसा होता है. I think that we should be very cautious, सावधानी से, बहुत सोच विचार के फिर हमें ऐसी बातें करनी चाहिए कि इसकी वजह से ये है. हाँ, इसका प्रभाव इस पे होता है और उसका प्रभाव इस पे होता है, परंतु अगर हम इसे डेफिनेटिवली एक जनरलाइजेशन बना के अपने न्यूज़पेपर स्टोरीज में या ऑप-एड्स में लिखेंगे, तो इसका बिल्कुल उल्टा असर होता है. बिकॉज देन यू थिंक कि हाँ ठीक है, होता है. हमारा in India we constantly tell children इसको adjust कर लो, इब्तिदा को लाइफ है, ऐसा ही होता है, ये जिंदगी है, ये दुनिया है. पर ऐसी दुनिया नहीं होनी चाहिए जहां हम हर गलत चीज के लिए एक कारण ढूंढ के उसे हम बस परमानेंट बनाएं. So, the answer to the question is really a combination of this and that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swarna and Dr. Reddy. There's another question by Ms. Deepika. This I will, one of my personal, Deepika writes in, one of my personal experiences while having or reporting mental health conversations, a lot of times, a commonplace thing is that people tend to use sadness and depression or anxiety and stress interchangeably. So I understand it's a complicated conversation and will take time to convert into a healthy discussion. But my question is, how do we as mental health advocates or reporters counter this argument? Would Dr. Senthil would like to take this question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for that, Rashmika. So I completely agree, and I think as people who sort of form a bridge, and people who are actually responsible for informing, educating the public, it is very, very important to actually break this sort of link that has been made. And I completely agree. There is anxiety and stress is interchangeably used. Depression and sadness is interchangeably used. I think what is very, very important for journalists and the various people from the media representatives understand is that it is about actually communicating that depression doesn't stand for sadness. These are not interchangeable terms. When we talk about depression as mental health professionals, we are very clear. We actually don't say depression. We actually say depressive disorder. It is actually an illness. And and it is not just characterized by sadness. And again, sadness, anxiety, emotions that all of us feel. When the only emotion you can feel, and the only emotion that persists, and there are very clear, sort of criteria for what stands or means or is can be diagnosed as depressive disorder. For example, you have to pretty much most of the time feel sad for a minimum period of 2 weeks. So that is the predominant, persistent emotion that you feel, even when there are circumstances around you that should otherwise bring some level of joy, some level of happiness to you. You are unable to experience it. Apart from just the emotional component, it is also about concurrent things like a disturbance of sleep, sleeping more or usually sleeping less than usual, finding it very difficult to sleep or getting up much earlier than usual in terms of quality of sleep. You lose your appetite at the same time, your memory, you start becoming more forgetful, your attention, your concentration gets reduced. You have all these sets of problems that occur together, and that actually is called what we call as a depressive disorder. And that's very different from sadness. Sadness is not associated usually by this, and sadness is usually transient. Similarly, again, about anxiety. Anxiety disorders are a whole set of disorders, and starting from generalized anxiety disorder to phobia. So phobia is very specific. It is, it could be, for example, and this is something that a lot of people have. So it could be situation specific, it could be a phobia or a specific fear of a particular thing. And other than that, the person may not be overwhelmed with that sort of fear. The generalized anxiety disorder is where a person is constantly feeling that there's a sense of free floating, what we call as free floating anxiety. And that has to be present for a certain number of days for it to be called a generalized anxiety disorder. And it's constant worry about day-to-day things. So the specific topic or the reason for why the person worries changes very quickly, but it changes very rapidly, and can be about day-to-day things. But it is the only prominent experience that the person has is worry and and anxiety. There's nothing else. It comes at the cost of everything else. So a person again can't concentrate, they can't focus on tasks. So when they find I think some other mic went off. So, quickly, these are disorders. There's clear, set of symptoms. There are a whole set of symptoms that need to occur, right? That's only then can we diagnose. And so that actually destigmatizes, because you actually, assign it a medical model, an illness model, rather than it actually just being, and that also destigmatizes some of these issues of anxiety spectrum disorders and depressive disorders.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reddy. A question to Dr. Jayant from Ms. Ruby Das, writing for the Janmabhoomi, Assam. And I also request Mr. Manoj to please respond. The question is, how should we report on substance use among vulnerable groups? Dr.
Yeah. So I think, sorry, can I come in?
Yes, Dr. Jain, please go ahead, and then I'll request Mr. Chandran to also join.
Yeah, so I think carrying on from what Dr. Senthil had mentioned already, I think reporting on substance use related issues is particularly fraught with issues of stigma, because in a sense, substance use is all too often linked with bad behavior. And being a person who treats individuals with substance use disorders, this is the general perception that families or communities come with, and in many cases fairly justifiably, because people under the influences of substances or even otherwise there are a number of bad behaviors that actually occur in that context. So when it comes to being able to report on substance use or substance use related problems, it actually behoves people to be all the more sensitive in being able to actually understand the contexts in which people use substances, the kinds of problems that they are facing. So using terms like drunkard, alcoholic, these are things which are seen to be very, very stigmatizing. So the field has moved away from these kinds of terms. In fact, we discourage even medical health professionals. In fact, it's very common. I remember when during my training, when one would actually write in one's case records that this person is a chronic smoker and alcoholic. Those are terms which are now shied away from. You want to use appropriate terms like alcohol use disorder or substance use disorder, which is what people suffer from. One also needs to be able to make the distinction between use of substances and dependent use, which is something which I had alluded to in my presentation as well. And that substance use actually it exists on a spectrum of problems. So there is use of substances which need not necessarily constitute a disorder, and then there is problematic patterns of use which are harmful and dependent patterns of use, and those constitute illnesses or disorders, and they need to be dealt with as such. So yes, definitely a very sensitive handling of reporting on substance use and substance use related problems are very, very important. And again, because substance use is related with so many other issues, both social issues as well as economic issues, the way that one contextualizes substance use when one is actually presenting those problems, and I think Dr. Swarna had mentioned about that as well. I mean, one cannot use substance use as a justification for the occurrence of certain other social problems. It is a factor which may contribute, but it is certainly not something that, okay, this was the reason why this has happened. They are independent issues. Alcohol use is the most common associated factor with domestic violence, but that does not mean that alcohol causes domestic violence. They are independent issues and they need to be given their own due. So being a practitioner who deals with people who have alcohol use disorders, I know a lot of my clients engage in domestic violence. I deal with domestic violence as an independent issue which needs to be dealt with, but I also deal with the person's alcohol use disorder because that is his medical issue and that needs to be dealt with as well.
Mr. Manoj, would you like to add on something?
Yeah, I think Dr. Madhavan has covered all the points here, but as journalists, I just want to add that it will really help if we always make sure that every time I have to write a report on a situation like this, can I reach out to a mental health professional and get an understanding of what is this problem about. So if a report has come to me about, let's say, a person with a history of substance abuse has done this, and I have to write about it, can I make sure, I may not be a health correspondent at all, but I can still go to a mental health professional and ask, how do I put this across? What are the different perspectives that I must cover? And so when the story pans out to me as a mental health issue as a base, I must make sure that I should not fall into that kind of trap. And that's something very difficult, but it again begins with just making sure that we have the right knowledge on mental health. And just to answer the little part of the previous question, which Dr. Reddy has so nicely articulated, what has happened over the few years is that in the common man's parlance of the mental health articulation, a lot of the illness names have come in. So depression, anxiety, OCD are being very fluidly used, actually. We loosely use it. And as journalists, if we can contribute to make sure that we make people self-aware of what happens if you're going to do that, that's something we must do. So if people tell us that, okay, there is a depression, there is an OCD problem and all, let us make sure that we are not going to use those words in our reports at all. At White Swan, we make sure that we don't use it unless a quote from a mental health professional comes in. It's not going to be a statement from us for the readers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chandran. I'd like to open this question to the panel. This question is from Ms. Narayani Ganesh from the Times of India, Delhi. Have any of you come across positive stories related to lockdowns where people have the opportunity to spend more time with family and bond better? May I request anyone
Shall I start? Yeah.
Yes, Dr.
I
Swati.
started saying, simultaneously looking at, we did a very small survey over the last 1 month. And I've seen people say that they were happy to spend more time with family and so on. But I must say that I am a little skeptical about these answers. Now, don't say that when I put the survey up, please praise it. But the truth is that we are also expected to say certain things. Are you having a good time, all of you at home? Of course, so wonderful to be together. So these, I don't know how people are actually feeling and whether they feel what they say. And I don't think we will find out unless they come into safe spaces. अगर इसके बाद जब इंशाल्लाह ये कभी खत्म होगी तो जब वो उनको मौका मिलेगा कि वो एक डॉक्टर या काउंसलर या फिर मेंटल हेल्थ प्रोफेशनल के पास जा सकते हैं या कोई भी हो गुरु टीचर और बता सकते हैं कि एक्चुअली मुझे ये हुआ मैं बहुत स्ट्रेस थी हर रोज ऐसे न्यूज आ रहे थे या फिर घर का काम बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ गया मैं कर नहीं पा रही हूँ दोनों तरफ से एक्सपेक्टेशन ज्यादा हो गए I don't know. I mean, yes, I know your questions about good news, but maybe I'm not feeling the good news today, so my answer is a little more skeptical.
Okay.
Dr. Reddy, are there any patients that you've come across and, who've sort of adjusted well during the time of the lockdown and they've actually improved family bonding at this time?
Yeah, so I think, again, these would be very anecdotal and probably the sporadic, inputs that we've received. I mean, like Dr. Jayant had mentioned, one of the things that we did, and so we may not be able to get a very holistic perspective of the individual in the context of their, in the family setting. But with respect to say illness, pre-existing, people who are receiving.
Someone needs to mute their mic.
Yeah. So what we actually very quickly did at NIMHANS was we actually started what is called a telephone-based follow-up for a lot of our patients who were already registered and under routine follow-up and regular follow-up with periodic ones. So the first set of people that we actually looked into were the people who were actually scheduled to come in for a review or an appointment. And we actually proactively called out to them and reached out to them and checked on them and wanted to find out whether they had adequate medicines available, whether there was any difficulties they were encountering with respect to re-emergence of any of their symptoms. And what we found was that proactive support was something that was very, very appreciated by them. The second thing that we did was we actually also coordinated with them in two ways. If they, for example, they had only medicines available for 5-6 days, we actually coordinated and networked with the local teams, a mental health delivery team. So, if, for example, in the state of Karnataka, we have actually district mental health program, which is covering all districts. So there is a team for each district. So we actually linked them in with those teams so that during the lockdown period also, despite physical constraints, they could actually receive that or go to the pharmacy and get an electronic prescription that was sent by us and show it at the pharmacy and collect the medicines. So a lot of them who's received free medicines from our hospital could actually get them from the district hospital itself or the district mental health team, and the others could just directly procure them from the pharmacies. So this was something that we found to be very useful, and the family members appreciated it because, again, it led to at least from a perspective of mental health care, ongoing continuity of care was maintained. The persons didn't suffer a relapse of their illness and could continue with their activities despite all the constraints that applied to the entire society that that had in terms of, with respect to the COVID-related, containment measures that were put in. So that was something that we found was, one thing. The other thing was a lot of people started using a lot of adaptive mechanisms. So, technology, even the phone helpline that Dr. Jayant had mentioned, a lot of people were calling in, appreciating the fact that they were, that there's someone available, available to hear them out, that they actually, could take on board certain suggestions for self-help strategies. And what they appreciated was they were not per se diagnosed. A lot of their concerns were acknowledged, understood, is what they said. We felt, accepted, understood. We had someone who could listen to us. And also the suggestions were not based on a medical model. It was about how you can help yourself feel better in the situation, in the extreme situation that you are in.
So much, Dr. Reddy. The next question is for Dr. Jayant. This question comes from Megha Kaveri. She asks, does substance abuse denote only tobacco and alcohol use, or does it also include other types of substances like, say, junk food, which invariably leads people to addiction and lifestyle diseases?
So I think that's an interesting question. For the purposes of our understanding, substances actually denote alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, which would include things like cannabis, opioids, stimulants, and other non-medically used drugs. There is an emerging area of study where people have actually looked at non-substance related addictions, which include food, among various other things, screens, food, all of those kinds of things. Those are called non-substance related or behavioral addictions. So while the evidence with regards to that is not as clear with other substances, we do understand that there are a number of people who have problematic patterns of eating, problematic patterns of using screens or engaging with technology. And oftentimes they actually do come to our attention for treatment as well. So while I would not be, at least this is my personal opinion, I would not like to combine the two. Chemical substances which include alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs are a different class. But there is emerging kind of literature and talk about behavioral addictions, and we do need to talk about all of these things, and we need to address people who have problems with controlling some of their impulses with regards to use of certain types of foods, as well as screens and technology as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jayant. The next two questions are for Mr. Chandran. Very quickly, one of our participants, Mr. Ritesh Sarak, asks, क्या समाचार में किसी के लिए मानसिक रूप से बीमार ये लिखा जा सकता है? मानसिक रोगी के लिए उपयुक्त शब्द क्या है? And the second question from Ujjal Bora, don't you think the changing tastes of readers and viewers have contributed to the violent depiction of such incidents by journalists? Please, Mr. Manoj. Mr. Manoj, may I please request you to answer the questions?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute, I think. So, धन्यवाद. मानसिक रूप से बीमार व्यक्ति, जहां तक मैं समझ पाता हूँ, इसका उपयोग सही होगा, क्योंकि इसका जिस तरह से हम इंग्लिश में कहते हैं, अंग्रेजी में कहेंगे कि पर्सन विथ मेंटल हेल्थ इश्यू, उसी तरह से मानसिक रूप से बीमार व्यक्ति का उच्चारण सही होगा। लेकिन मानसिक रोगी, जहां तक प्रयास हो उसका उपयोग ना करें तो अच्छा होगा, क्योंकि रोगी जब यूज करना शुरू करते हैं, तब हम whole lot of other perspectives come in कि उसका क्या प्रॉब्लम है। तो इसलिए मानसिक रोगी ना यूज करके मानसिक रूप से बीमार व्यक्ति का उपयोग सही होगा। Second question was, have you come across positive stories related to lockdowns where people have the opportunity to spend? No, sorry, that was not the question. Sorry, what was the second question, if I could know?
The second question is, don't you think the changing tastes of readers and viewers has contributed to the violent depiction of such incidents by journalists?
So that is a trap. I mean, we as journalists will decide whether we want to fall into or not. I mean, are we going to report about on the lines of what the common notions and beliefs on a certain subject is, or are we going to take the role of correcting that? And mental health is a very new subject if you look at for us journalists, for us people who are writing in media. So it is extremely important that we, the first generation of journalists who are really focusing the entire career on area like mental health, is creating the right foundation. So if we are going to say that we will stay away from the commonly believed notions and held myths, and going to course correct that the society has so far been following, then that is the right way to approach the subject, I would say. Otherwise, we just as we have started seeing this happening in many other areas, we will fall, we'll become a victim of what the community or society today feels on the subject of mental health also.
So much, Mr. Manoj. There's one last question. If I could request this last question to be answered. I know it's already past 3:30, but Megha Kaveri again asks, how do we deal with conflicts arising in a family when they are cooped up together for so long? How do we sensitively write about these things, since these are not standalone matters? In a lot of households, people with different socio-political, ideological standpoints are forced to live with each other only because movement is restricted. How to address the anxiety arousing out of it? This is open to the panel. Anybody would like to step in?
So from a journalism point of view, again, if I could pick up Kaveri, Megha. So it is so nice that you have thought about writing on this topic itself. That itself is a very good first step, I would say. I think in terms of what needs to be covered, it is about the research. It is about really talking to all the stakeholders and understanding what are the different aspects and facets that must be covered. We have done that. We've covered the subject in some way through webinars and content in different ways. You know, the thing about mental health you've learned is that there is no one story that will fit all profiles of people in a society. If you write on this fact about domestic violence, or even the fact that we are all cooped up in one house, we will write one story and we will figure out that it probably fits in for a certain kind of people. We may have to repeat that for different profiles of people. People will not relate to. This is a very personal subject, mental health. People really want to be seen talking to them through the instances we are narrating, the stories we are bringing in, the examples we are bringing in. So from the economic strata of the society to social structure of the society, you have to really dissect this one topic, just as an example, across all the dimensions to be repeatedly writing about it. That's my take on from a journalism perspective.
Thank you. I think we've sort of run out of time. We have some more very, very interesting questions. And my request is that, we email some of them to, the experts to whom they were directed, so that there's also a sort of a, relationship building going on between the journalists who've taken time out to be here with us, as well as the experts who've been, kind enough to give us their time. I'm just going to ask Anupama, the Deputy Director of REACH, to say a few words at this point and, conclude this webinar.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jaya. And I won't take too much time. I just want to say, I think, as public health professionals or journalists, these are very surreal times for all of us. And I think to say the least, and that's an understatement. As public health professionals at REACH, we've had to, similar to what Dr. Reddy was describing, we've had to rethink how we support people with tuberculosis. How do we make sure we get medicines to them during a lockdown? How do we make sure we're addressing their mental health needs or, other related issues? And we've really had to rethink all of this. And I think similarly, as journalists, for those of you who are here with us today, this is a fascinating time to be reporting on health issues. And I think one of the few silver linings, although that's going too far, is I really hope this focus on health reporting will sustain beyond the COVID situation and the COVID moment. And we look at all these complex issues around epidemiology, around mental health, around gender-based violence, and continue to look at them through many lenses. And our objective today was really to get journalists thinking about some of these issues. We know we can't do justice to the complexity of anxiety or substance use disorders or gender-based violence in an hour and 20 minutes. But we hope it's given you some ideas, some food for thought in terms of stories that you could consider. I mean, just listening to the speakers, I was just thinking of and what Mr. Chandran was sharing, so many story ideas at the state and district and local levels to explore. So we really hope you'll be able to go out there and consider all these different angles. Just like to end by saying thank you so much once again on behalf of REACH to all our speakers, Dr. Reddy, Dr. Mahadevan, Dr. Rajagopalan, and Mr. Chandran. We really appreciate the time you've taken, and we do hope that this is a conversation we can keep going. And finally, to all the journalists who've joined us today, thank you so much. Please feel free to reach out. I think you're all in touch with Rashmika and of course Dr. Jaya and myself if you have any questions. So on that note, take care everyone, wear a mask and stay safe. Thank you everybody. Thank you so much Dr. Jaya and Rashmika for coordinating this and pulling this together.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Reddy. Thanks, Dr. Jain. Thanks, Dr. Rajagopalan, Mr. Chandran. And thanks, everyone, for being here with us this afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for asking us.
Thank you.